On BBC One tomorrow, there's a brand new adventure of Doctor Who. The TARDIS materialises in a satellite control room.
I'm a simple sort of chap. Are you trying to tell me that we're now in the middle of the 30th century?
Good heavens, no. Well beyond that.
Beyond the 30th?
Well, you gave that helmet regulator quite a twist, I'm afraid.
Well, but where are we?
Difficult to say. All this stuff's obviously been here for some time. Several thousand years, at least.
Doctor! Doctor! There's hardly any air in here! Doctor, please!
The Ark in Space, the new Doctor Who story, is at 5:35 tomorrow on BBC One.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another brand new video where today we are continuing with the classic Doctor Who reviews, moving into story number 2 from Tom Baker's era as the Doctor, the second story of season 12. It's The Ark in Space. As I say, the second story for Tom Baker, we've had Robot, we've had the unit story where we've sort of had the regeneration story, we've established who Tom Baker's Doctor is. And now it's time for the show to kind of move into a new direction a little bit more. With that first story, it was still being produced under the previous sort of head writers and producers of Barry Letts and Terence Dicks. But then for this episode onwards, it was Philip Hinchcliffe taking over from the role as the sort of executive producer alongside Robert Holmes as the main script editor, which meant they wanted to kind of put their stamp on the programme and do things a little bit differently. Hence why we get a story that you probably wouldn't really have seen in any of the Pertwee year in terms of going out completely into space, completely ignoring and forgetting about Unit again. And it's kind of really, I think although Robot is obviously the fourth Doctor's first story, it feels like really, I think The Ark in Space is the proper kind of start of the new era where things really do properly change and move away from what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So as I say, this story sees us leave Earth completely and move to this nervous space station or sort of solar space station where essentially we learn is an Ark ultimately. We have the Doctor, we have Sarah and we have Harry going off on there, the sort of TARDIS team for season 12. And I feel this story, as we see later through the rest of the season, kind of starts a sort of 4-story mini arc really. Based around the whole Nerva beacon. Initially landing there, then they go down to Earth and Centurion Experiment, get whisked off in Genesis of the Daleks, and then not back in Nerva beacon for the last story of Revenge of the Cybermen. It's quite a nice way to kind of link every story together, I think, saving money on props, of course, by using the same set for both The Ark in Space and Revenge of the Cybermen. And it's worth talking about those sets because I feel like that's one of the biggest kind of strengths and positives about The Ark in Space is how phenomenal the setting of this looks. Given that there is no location footage in the whole story, it's purely studio-based footage and all, as I say, interior spaceship designed studio shots and studio sets. To have this phenomenal looking, particularly the area where we've got all the cryogenically sort of frozen humans, the way that it's designed makes it look like there's so many more than there actually is. And it's fascinating watching the documentaries and learning about some of the trickery behind that, where obviously there's only actually 3 rungs of those people there, despite the fact that it kind of implies all the time with the way it's shot, it kind of suggests that there's rows and rows and rows and thousands of rows going upwards when actually there's only 3 rows of it. And the really, really clever idea of when we see some shots looking down a corridor towards like another room full of these people is actually just a mirror placed down there at the right angle, so it's literally just reflecting back on what we're already seeing, but giving the impression that there's loads more of it, which is so really clever, such a clever idea and such an effective way of using a low budget and not enough money to be able to make a big set, but be able to create it into something even bigger. And the same with the corridors used as well, the sort of main corridors of the side of the spaceship, the way that it's kind of on a curve slightly. And it's actually a really, really short piece of sort of set that they've used. They've just got it at the exact right angle so you can't see the end of it. But basically it's just a few more centimetres around the corner is the end of that corridor there that's allowed that they can actually use. And then they just come back and shoot it from the other end and it makes it look like a really long and sort of changing and winding corridor. It's just so clever and so effective, such a great way of, from a production point of view, of using such a small budget to be able to still create really big and impressive visuals. And I think that's something that really, really helps out this story when, as I say, it's so studio bound in that sense. As a pure story, I know it's a very, very highly rated one by fans. It's always thought of as, one of the highlights of Tom Baker's era. And I did enjoy it. I don't know, it's never quite done it for me as much as it has for other people personally. I do like the whole idea. I do like the idea of the Ark. I like the idea of the frozen humans and then coming to life again. Then this sort of creature called the Wirrn that's infiltrating into the place has turned up before, and then this one that changes into different forms as well through time. wanting to just kind of take over and kill all the humans, basically. It's kind of the basic idea, or feed off them, basically, use them to become stronger and take on all their knowledge and absorb it all and everything is sort of the basic idea. And I think it is pretty well written, it's pretty well scripted, it all comes together fairly well, and it's good. I'm not trying to deny I'm not saying it's a bad story at all, it is a very well written and decent story. It's just never been something that personally for me has quite kind of got me really, really excited and really, really interested in this particular story, I think. I do think that in particular though, the first part of this story is a really, really strong one. It is basically just a three-hander between the Doctor, Sarah and Harry. They are the only speaking parts pretty much we see in that whole first episode. So it's very much left on their shoulders to kind of take the story and carry it through. But actually it's really, really interesting and fascinating. It's so kind of, I think, mysterious at this point, because we've turned up on this mysterious kind of space station thingy that's completely deserted of all people and life and everything. You've got wires that seem to have been tampered with and cut, bitten, as the Doctor mentions in that first part, and it's just this fascinating kind of insight in trying to gradually learn and understand exactly what's going on here. What is this all about? Until obviously at the end of the first episode we find out that there's all these frozen humans and that it's actually an ark, a cryogenic chamber, for all these people who are trying to sort of carry on into the new age, as it were, and start this new world. So yeah, I just feel like it's a really, really effective first part in particular to this story to really get you hooked in and kind of wanting to understand the real mystery behind this. I think it just works so well, and having three great lead actors as well, I think is a really, really helps carry this story, because otherwise if the performances weren't quite there, then it could have flopped. But I think it just really makes you more intrigued than ever to find out what's going to happen later in the story. Now, of course, one of the things this story is probably known for, or sort of rather infamously, is the bubble wrap monster. The captain's arm, of course, covered in bubble wrap as he's gradually getting turned into a proper Wirrn. It's not great. I think that, as mentioned in some of the documentaries, the thing worth mentioning is that bubble wrap was not a common household item that was used generally at the time in 1975. Like, this was something completely new and no one really recognised it, no one would have really known anything about it. And so to see this bubble wrap on screen, you wouldn't have thought, oh yeah, that's bubble wrap, it looks awful. You would have just thought it's this weird kind of plasticky material that's kind of could be believably an alien. I think it doesn't help that this is the sort of story that pushes the classic Doctor Who narrative of, oh, classic Who, there was all wobbly sets and bubble wrap monsters and things like that. And this is obviously the story where they actually do that with the bubble wrap monsters. But it doesn't look great, but I also don't think it looks completely terrible. Particularly, of course, the actual fully formed Wirrn does look really, really impressive. I think that's such a great kind of costume that's been put together there. It's a really believable costume of this kind of almost wasp-like figure, I think is the best way to describe it. It just looks fantastic. But yeah, the actual initial Wirrn, when it's all sort of moving around on the floor, yes, doesn't look so great. There's no denying that. It could have, as they mentioned, done with a little bit more slime, maybe, for example. Or there probably would have been better ways to do it. But I personally don't think the bubble wrap is the worst thing in the world, and it doesn't massively detract from the story, I'd say. But it is a fascinating kind of look at this captain who's gradually getting kind of possessed by the Wirrn and being taken over his mind and his body, and just seeing him kind of fighting against that at points throughout the story, desperately kind of pleading with them to escape, get out of here, because the Wirrn's gonna take over and kill you all. And it's just that fascinating look at that kind of possession and taking over of a person, which of course becomes a little bit of a common trait in some Robert Holmes stories. He kind of explores it in something like Seeds of Doom, for example, among other stories in the future. But I don't mind that. I think it works really, really well. And it's a fascinating kind of look at that within this story, and just this idea of this this selection of people who are the chosen people for this starting a new version of Earth in the future, who are supposedly kind of superior to everybody else, a perfect batch of different types of people chosen to put together to create the perfect kind of human race in the future is the idea. And the fact that the Doctor and co could come and contaminate them and make it a sort of an unclean batch that can't be used basically then in the future is such an interesting idea. And the fact they'd just be wiped out because they're going to infect the batch by just being there and being different to what's being planned and assessed to be the right idea, I think is really, really interesting. And so it's just quite a good way to explore that as well. And just the kind of funny moments of the different kind of language that they use while we're seeing Harry with his lots of kind of old Earth lingo and stuff, the quite traditional language in some senses, that Wirrn just doesn't have a clue about and doesn't understand at all, is quite, it sort of adds to some quite comedic moments, I think, throughout the story, which works really, really well. Probably if I had to pick one kind of thing that I like maybe a bit less about this story, it would be, to an extent, the ending to the story. I felt it was maybe a little bit rushed towards the end. I did quite like the idea of all the Wirrn being led into this kind of space spacecraft that was going to evacuate and leave, and then because the captain's still got some control of his mind, he's able to kind of lead them off and then blow the ship up, or knowing the ship's going to blow up, so he can take all the Wirrn and defeat them. It's quite a nice idea, and I do quite like that side of it. Just for me, maybe it felt like it just kind of all happened a little bit too quickly. Suddenly, it's over, they've been defeated, cool, we're good now. But I do quite like the Doctor and Sarah and Harry being sort of sent to Earth there. They're going to go in to set up the next story, to have it lead straight in by them heading off to Earth to go and have an explore of what's going on down there and whether it's ready to be inhabited or not. I think it's just a good way to kind of connect the stories, a little bit like what you had at the very beginning of Classic Who in sort of season 1 and 2, where stories very much led directly into each other and there was that less of that divide between separate stories. So I'm looking forward to that, watching this entire experiment again next week to kind of see how that kind of continues straight into the next story is something I'm looking forward to. And I just think it works quite effectively, and it's something that of course is used throughout season 12 as well. But yeah, so overall the Ark in Space I think is a pretty strong story. It's just never one that quite fully clicked with me, as I say, but it's by no means a bad story. It's still one I thoroughly enjoyed. But guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you enjoy about the Ark in Space? Would you say it's one of your favourite Tom Baker stories, or if you're like me, you're not quite so sure about it? I'd just love to hear any of your thoughts you've got down in the comments below. But apart from that, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this review. I'll be back again, as I say, next week, hopefully to review the Centauran experiment as well. That's another one to look forward to. But apart from that, as always, guys, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new one. Goodbye.